Okay, so one of the things about Kant that you've noticed is that he says morality has to follow rules, or morality consists in following rules. Now, those rules sort of have two sides. One of the sides we've talked about already, and frankly, most students don't like. The other side of it, though, is what, for a lot of you, is going to sort of save Kant. It'll make Kant a lot more attractive. It'll make his morality make more sense and look like a better option, basically. So the side of Kant that we've already talked about is that morality always has to be rule-based. It's not based on what people want, so different people wanting different things doesn't matter much for Kant. It doesn't matter on the consequences, the payout, the effects, like it does for utilitarianism. So the point is that the side we just talked about is what I called reason, and it means that the rules are the same for everyone. They're pretty consistent. There are not exceptions to rules, even though there may be certain situations where you might act differently, but it's always going to be based on something that you could say, it's my way of putting Kant, is that you would want everyone in a similar situation to you to act in the same way. If you can honestly say that about what you're doing, then it's universal, it applies to you and everyone else, it's consistent, etc. Now, I know most of you don't like that, and you say that that's never going to work in the world, it's not practical, or it's going to make some people unhappy, and I get that. I mean, I think that's not as strong of a point as it seems. It is a strong point, but not quite as strong as it seems. But here's the other side of Kant. And this one will probably sound a lot more attractive to you. So remember, I said Kant says, hey, if you're going to talk about morality, you have to focus on what's essential to morals. Not detailed stuff. Not things that are good but aren't morally good. Remember that stuff I said about, well, money's good, but it's not morally good. It's not morally bad either. It's just, it's neutral, basically. Okay. Well, remember, I said you got to focus on what's particular to human beings, and then you can figure out what human morality is supposed to be like, and we just talked about how reason will help you see what rule is consistent, what good behavior could be expected not only of you right now, but of everyone all the time. Okay? That's the rational side of human beings. And that's the part most of you aren't going to like. Fair enough. The part that most of you are going to like is he says, well, what else? What else is sort of defines human beings and will be therefore important for defining what human morality should focus on? Our freedom, our free will, basically for Kant that we are masters of our own ships. Right? For him, freedom is less about having two options that you could just sort of flip-flop and choose either one, right? Like Diet Coke or Coca-Cola. That's not really what he's talking about. When he's talking about freedom, the reason why he uses this word autonomy is important. For Kant, real freedom is not just then when you do something for no reason, or when you do something at random, you go, oh, they're out of Coke, I guess I'll get Mountain Dew. Right? The fullest, most real human freedom, the kind that matters the most and will matter for morality, is what he calls autonomy. So the word autonomy is a word you've probably heard before, autonomous or autonomy. But if you look at the root words that make it up, it really shows you what Kant means by it. So auto doesn't mean car, it means self. Right? So that's the first part of the word, auto meaning self. The second part is nomos, which in ancient Greek means law. So the kind of freedom that Kant is going to focus on, and it's important for humans generally, and it's important for morality, is he says, when you tell yourself that you want to do something moral, Okay? When you tell yourself that you want to do something moral, you're doing it just because it's the right thing to do, correct? Okay? So he says, when you're doing something and it's truly, genuinely a good thing, you're not doing it because you're scared of consequences. Oh, if I don't do this, my mom will be mad at me, the professor will fail me for the class, right? Because true morality, he says, comes only from a goodwill, only from wanting to do the right thing just because it's the right thing to do. So in true morality for Kant, you do something just because it's the right thing to do. You don't do it because you're, say, for instance, scared that you'll get punished or yelled at for doing the wrong thing. Okay? Trust me, this links back to autonomy. I'll show you how. Think about how little kids act. Little kids do whatever they feel like doing, and that's fine. They don't know any better, right? But they do whatever they feel like doing. The only way you can get a young kid, to do what's right is you either give them a treat. You say, hey, if you clean your room, I'll give you a treat. If you give them a treat, or you punish them. Hey, if you keep hitting your little brother, I'm going to ground you for a week. Now, regardless of, so the child, even if they act rightly, they're only acting rightly because it satisfies what Kant calls an inclination. That is, they're inclined to like candy and sweets, so if you offer them a sweet when they clean their room, they're likely to do it. The other thing, punishment, is based on fear. And Kant says, if you, quote, choose to be nice to your little brother because you're scared of punishment, you're not genuinely free at that moment. Now, I know what you're saying. You're saying, hey, I could choose to be mean to him or choose not to. Like I said, Kant, when he says freedom, isn't really talking about picking between option A or B. He's talking about where your motive to pick one or the other comes from. And Kant says, if you do any behavior because you are scared of punishment or bad consequences from somebody else, you are not free when you chose that. So I'll say that again. For Kant, if you do anything because you are scared of the bad consequences that'll come if you don't do it, you are not free in his sense of autonomous. You're not autonomously free when you choose to do something out of fear. Like I said, I know that sounds a little strange. You're like, well, if I didn't choose it, who did? But freedom's not about choice for him. He's going to say, where did your idea come from to be nice to your little brother? Did you come up with it autonomously? Did you give that rule or that nomos? Nomos is rule or law. Auto is self. Did you self-give yourself the law that said, hey, you should be nice to your little brother. Don't pick on the weak? No. That instruction did not come from yourself autonomously. It came from your parents, and it has a threat attached to it. Kant thinks when you do something that most people would call morally good, if you do it because you're scared of getting busted if you don't, you are not moral at that moment because you're not autonomous at that moment. And you're not autonomous because basically you're doing what someone else is not forcing you, but they planted the idea and they're the one motivating you to act. If they took away the consequences and the punishment, you wouldn't act that way, right? So let's say you stay out late at night and your parents say, hey, we're going to punish you if you keep breaking curfew. Well, you're going to come back home and for curfew more often. And the test is if they took away the punishment, they said, you know what, we want you here at 10, but do whatever you want. We'd like it if you respected our rules, but if you don't want to, we can't make you. You'd then be more likely to stay out late, right? So really, it's their words, their punishment, their rules that make you act, Kant would say, when you're scared of punishment. Okay? Now, Kant says if you chose to do the same exact action, but you chose it because you just think it's the right thing to do, if you're ignoring the possible punishment, consequences, etc., and you do it just because you know it's the right thing to do, then you're free, and then the action is moral. So one way to put this is that for Kant, motive is everything. Why are you doing this action? Actions are a lot like money. They can be good or bad depending on how you do them or how you use them. If you're doing an action just to please somebody else or to avoid punishment from somebody else, then somebody else is actually sort of like the puppet master for you. If, on the other hand, you decide to do something just because you want to do the right thing, then you are giving the rule, do this nice thing, to yourself. This is what Kant says. Following moral rules is not, slavery is not quite the right word. Following moral rules is actually not following what other people want you to do. Kant says moral rules are given to you by yourself. Right? The truly moral rule is the one that you give to yourself and you find enjoyment in doing because it's what you wanted to do in the first place. Not when you find enjoyment in it because you escaped a punishment, or not when you found enjoyment in it because somebody rewarded you with a little sweet like a child. But when as an adult you say, hey, I want to do this thing. And someone says, well, it's going to be painful or difficult. And you say, that's okay. I would rather pay a cost and do something good than let someone else control my life by letting them tell me what's right and wrong. So that's the autonomy sections in our book. And that's, as I said, the flip side or the second side of Kant that most people find more appealing. Because I know nobody really likes to follow rules that are the same exact rule for everyone. That's the first part that people don't like. But then he flips on it and he says, yeah, but where'd that rule come from? Maybe your parents said it to you when you were young, but if you act on a moral rule now, it's not because your parents told you about it. It's because you want to do it. And when you do something that you want to do, you are free for Kant. And when you give yourself a law or rule, that's the nomos of autonomy, then it's not actually that you are following a rule, he says. It's that you created a rule for yourself. You chose your path. Now, quickly I want to add, we're going to return to this point, but quickly I want to add. Some of you are probably thinking here, yeah, well, what if I want to do is eat candy all day and not clean my room and lie to people, etc. Kant saying as long as I chose to do that, then I'm good? Good. No. Is that you have to choose something because you think it's genuinely the right, best thing to do. And remember, it also has to be something, the first part, that you would say the world would be a better place. It would be morally good if everyone did the same thing I'm doing. So you can say that about helping the poor, doing your homework, being polite to your professor, yeah, and trying to take care of your health and body. Those are things that you would do because you think they're the right thing to do, not because they please you. Those are things that you would say, hey, if everyone did that, the world would be a better place. On the other hand, if you try to imagine, what if everyone did the same thing in my situation? If they put their papers off to the last minute, if all they did was eat junk food, if they were mean to other people and they lied all the time, would I say the world would be a better place morally if that was people's attitude? No. So remember, Kant doesn't think anything you will or choose is morally good just because you willed it or chose it. It's when you give the law or the rule, the moral rule to yourself, and when you are motivated to do it just because you think it's the right thing to do. And he says you can only really rationally think it's the right thing to do if you think the world would be right and good if everyone did the similar thing in a similar circumstance. So you see, we have to clarify those things, or else it sounds like Kant just says, don't listen to your parents, do whatever you want, which is not what he means. Okay, just a little bit more, and then I know this is abstract. We'll work with the examples he gave to make it a little more concrete. Okay. So, there is a cluster of terms that fit together in Kant. Freedom, autonomy, dignity, and ends in themselves. You see this around page 38, 39, 40. So those terms they all link together. Remember how reason, universal, law all sort of clustered together as nearly synonymous words? Freedom, autonomy, end in itself, which I'll explain in a second, and dignity all cluster together as another set of related terms that basically mean the same thing. So Kant says this. He says humans are rational. We can figure things out. We can make generalizations and make universal rules. We're also free, which means we can choose what we want to do, and when we choose to do the best thing, that's sort of to our glory. It's part of what makes being a human being special. So Kant thinks that our ability to be free, our free will, used correctly, giving the nomos or law to yourself, choosing to do something not because it's fun or because you get hurt by the cops if you don't, but choosing it just because it's good to do. He says that's what makes human beings dignified. So think about it. Computers are very smart. They can do rationality. Or you might say, I don't know, maybe you'd say scientists, right? Scientists figure all these things out. That's good. But do you think a scientist is like a better person for knowing more things? Or do you think your professors are better people than you are because they know more things? No. I don't. Kant doesn't. I bet you don't either. Okay. So where does I don't want to say this. Let's put it this way. A scientist is a good person. It's good to be a scientist, a scholar, know a lot of baseball trivia. It's good to be smart. But Kant would say this. If someone is not very smart, do you look at them as less of a human being? Do you look at them as a worse person? Probably not, and he doesn't. However, if someone is shifty, shady, and shameless, if they are lying to all their friends, cheating on their exams in school, cheating on their significant others, always missing their parents' and friends' birthdays, etc. I'm talking about a real shady person. Do you think that person is a less good person? Do you think that they are less fully developed as a human being? I know that language can sound harsh, but let's put it this way. When someone's of average intelligence, you probably don't look down your nose at them. And when someone's dumb, even if they're properly dumb, you might look down your nose at them, but I don't think you think they're like a bad, low-quality human being, right? But when someone's really shifty, shady, and shameless, you do look down their nose at them, or should, and you do think they're a less good, less quality human being. So Kant says, just flip it. When someone's moral, we think of them as a better person. This is why we can all rattle off these names. Gandhi, Mother Teresa, right? Some of you know even more. You know, people who go above and beyond. Those people have dignity. Now, why do we think they're better people? Why do we think that they have sort of extra dignity? Because they do the right thing just because it's the right thing. But where does that dignity come from? Not just the rational side of their brain, the rule-making side of their brain, the scientist, computer, professor side of their brain. It has to be in their will or their choice. They have to want to be good people. And when someone wants to be a good person, that's the goodwill that Kant started this section of reading out with. So here's the thing. The goodwill is what makes your dignity clear to others. Okay, we've heard stories about how much Mother Teresa did. She used her will in a good way almost all the time. But Kant says, but the will can always choose the good, even if it's chosen something bad before. So here's his thing. All the freedom, autonomy we've been talking about, everyone could at every moment freely choose to be a good person, Kant says. It's not always easy, but in theory, right, you could always, in theory, resist the temptation. Well, Kant says, okay, if you could always resist the temptation, even when you don't, you still have dignity as a human being, because the thing that causes good moral behavior is a freedom of will, that possibility to autonomously give yourself the moral goal. That never goes away. Even when you're a very bad person, you could choose to be a good person tomorrow. So what Kant says is everyone has full to the limit dignity. Every human being, just because they're a human being, has dignity and moral value. Now, why is that? Page 39 talks about it. The will must regard it as itself giving the law, the moral law and rule, of which it can regard itself as the author. So your ability to give yourself the guideline, hey, I'm going to do this good thing now even though I don't want to, that power lies inside of each one of us at every moment. So, every human being has that full to the brim at every moment. Every human being can actualize that tomorrow, even if they've been using it badly before. So you have to treat every person as basically a potentially moral person. Being a moral person is what confers extra value and extra worth on someone. Since everyone has the kernel or possibility of that inside them all the time, everyone basically is as dignified as the most moral. Basically, you have to respect the power of being a human being in every person at every moment. Because all of us have that power and capacity in us of free will and autonomy to will and choose the good thing at every moment. So remember, we said there's one way to think about morality for Kant before. It's based in reason and rationality, and it's that moral rules have to be consistent. They have to be the same rules for everyone, applied consistently all the time. Here's the other way to think about morality, and it makes a lot more sense to people than the first one. Or many students like it a lot better. This is where he says treating people as ends in themselves. Kant says, since your ability to choose who you are and be who you are comes from your will and your autonomy, and you respect that about yourself, that you choose to do good things and that you are the captain of your own life, you respect that in yourself, well, you should respect something similar when you see it in other people. But remember the point I just made, that ability to choose, that autonomous ability to be a good person, that is in fact in every person at every moment. So this is a bit wishy-washy the way I'm about to put it, but the point is this. If you like yourself when you do something morally good, and if you like the fact about yourself that at any moment, even when you've screwed up, you can fix it tomorrow if you really want to. That you can turn things around. If you respect that, and if you think people should give you a second shot when you've messed up, and you think people should give you credit and praise you when you haven't messed up, then you have to respect that same capacity and that same power in everybody else. Because everyone else has the same dignified power that you do. The ability to do good, even when you've messed up before. That's the second way to think about what morality is for Kant. You have to treat every person you meet with dignity and respect. They deserve dignity and respect because they're human. Another way to put that is you respect yourself when you give yourself a moral goal and achieve it. You think that's worthy and valuable. So you should respect them because they too have that power to do it, even when they're not doing it. So for Kant, the second main way to think about what morality is that you cannot use people. That's the phrase he talks about on page 38b. He says, you can ask other people to do things for you, and if they want to, they can do it. But if you use people, that is, you make them do what you want to do against what they want to do, that's using them, and that's morally wrong. Now, I know it sounds bad to say, oh, you use someone, but here's why it's wrong for Kant, and this is important. The whole point about being a human being is that you get to choose what you do. So if your choice of what to do is to use someone else, you're choosing as a human to make sure another human can't choose what to do with her or his life. That is wrong. It's also inconsistent, going back to the reason, law, rationality thing. You cannot use other people in Kant. You cannot use other people as if they're things or tools, is what he says on 38b. Because you see what a perversion of freedom and will that is? If you use your freedom and will to destroy the freedom and will of someone else. Okay. So basically, the second way to think about morality for Kant is don't make people do things that they don't want to do. Don't treat people one way and treat yourself another way. So don't treat them as victims, basically, and treat yourself as the aggressor. Okay. Let people be free in their dignity and choose what they want to do, and don't force them to do something just because it would please you. Okay? So, let's talk a little bit about examples. I know this one's going a little long. It's because Kant is so much fun. And he's quite difficult. But let's go to the examples one more time. And then I'm going to ask you a question. It's the only one from this recording. Or for Kant so far. About these examples. The first time he gives these examples, which are page 37, I want you to focus on the way he phrases that example, the first example about lying. Or sorry, the second example about lying, page 37b. And he says, is it wrong to borrow money that you need, like to keep your family afloat, knowing that you can't pay it back? So don't think of this as theft. He thinks of it as lying about your ability to repay the loan. And he says, would it be rational, could you make a rule that says when somebody really, really, really needs money, they should be able to lie in order to get money? Now, a lot of people might say yes, because they say it's just a little lie, and the person needs it. But for Kant, he says, no, you're looking at consequences. Oh, if they get the money, they'll be able to buy bread. He says, I'm just talking about whether the decision is a moral decision. Not the results of the decision, if we like them, but just can the decision to lie for money be a moral act? Or to break promises, can that be a moral act? And he says, no, because it can never be a rule that you'd want everyone to follow. It can never be a moral guideline that you could generalize and say most people in this situation should do this thing most of the time. Because he says, I covered this one a bit, so I'll keep it short. He says, if you say, I think the rule should be that when someone really needs money, they can lie in order to get it, then what's going to happen is you're going to have people lying all the time, but also sometimes telling the truth when they don't need the money. What would happen is your decision to use words against what they mean would make it where all words become meaningless. Because you can't tell truth from fiction anymore. You cannot rationally prefer a world where half the time people lie and half the time they tell the truth. You cannot rationally prefer that to a world which people tell the truth all the time, whether they need money or don't. Okay? So you can't make that a general moral guideline. Therefore, it can't be a moral, with an M, moral thing to do. Okay? Now let's go to the time where he lists the second examples. It says illustrations on page 39. Okay? And he's talking about suicide. Okay? This one I'm going to use as an example of using people as means rather than ends. Let me quickly redefine that. The means-ends relationship, you can see it in Aristotle too, but a refresher is that a means is like a process or tool that you're using, literally using the means, and the end is the thing which is valued for its own sake. So you walk to school Not most days because you feel like walking, but that's just what you're using in order to get your real goal, the thing with real worth, which is to go to school. Okay? You use a hammer when you build a house. That's the means, the hammer and the saws and tools. You use them not because you love using tools, but so that you can have the house, which is the truly valuable thing in this scenario. Okay? So remember, Kant says it's immoral to treat someone as a means and use them. You have to treat them as an end into themselves, which means that they're intrinsically dignified, they're valuable themselves, no matter whether they are benefiting you or not. So this is the crazy thing Kant says about suicide. He says suicide is wrong. Why? Not because there's some 10 commandments or the cops don't want you to. Those would be external and therefore not free. Not because your suicide might make other people sad. Those are consequences that, that's utility. We don't care about that when we're doing Kant. He says, when you commit suicide, it's actually that you are using yourself as a tool. So suicide is wrong for him, not because of anyone else, but because of what you do to yourself, how you use yourself. Okay? And as I said, this one's probably a little more clear when he talks about it on page 39, because there he's talking about means and ends. He says, when someone's life is really, really bad and they're thinking about killing themselves, why do they want to do that? Remember, motives, what's really motivating someone is very important for Kant. So when someone's suffering greatly and they want to end their life, what's really motivating them to do that? It's that they want to relieve their suffering. Now, Kant says you can relieve your suffering. Sure you can. But there's only certain ways of relieving your suffering which are legitimate, and there's other ones which are immoral and illegitimate. How do you tell? Well, you say, in this scenario, am I using any human being in the world, as a tool to get myself something I want? If so, it's wrong. And this is what he says about suicide. He says, in suicide, ignore who's doing what. But in suicide, someone kills someone else to relieve someone's suffering. To make that a little less confusing, in suicide, a person kills themselves with the goal of ending their suffering. Now, Kant would say, could you kill someone else in order to make yourself happier? Let's say you have a neighbor who's really, really noisy. They cause you all this suffering. They keep you up late at night. They're messy. They have garbage in their front yard. If you killed them, you would relieve some of your suffering, correct? Okay, can you kill them? You've got a goal. Can you kill someone to make yourself happier? No. Now, Kant's way of saying no is he says you cannot use another person, force them to do something that takes away their freedom, in order to please yourself. So Kant says suicide is just homicide. It just happens, it's got one target, yourself, instead of another target, another person. So he says, if your goal in suicide is to relieve your suffering, what you're saying is, it would please me to relieve my suffering. I'm willing to kill someone. I'm willing to use someone as a means rather than an end. I'm willing to take someone and take away their freedom in order to make my suffering go away. Yes, it's yourself, but Kant says it doesn't matter who you use as a tool. Any use of a person as a tool violates their freedom and their dignity. Basically, if someone commits suicide because they're unhappy, they're treating their own life as if it's an impediment, an obstacle, a thing to be gotten rid of when it's not good anymore. Your car is that kind of thing, not a human being. Your car, if it no longer pleases you, sell it, burn it, sell it for scrap, drive it into the river, who cares? You can do whatever you want with your car or any other thing because they don't have dignity, they just have whatever value you give them. But Kant says a human life is so valuable that no matter what would be gained by destroying that human life is the kind of thing that you cannot treat as a tool to be thrown away when it no longer pleases you. So here's the question. This one will go relatively quickly, and it will be the end of our Kant recordings on morality, okay? For the 4 examples that he gives, do you think that those 4 things are wrong, as he does? Or do you think that they can be acceptable? And tell us why. So once more, those 4 examples, he lists them on page 39, and he also listed them on page 37. Okay. So there's 4 examples. Suicide is one, lying for some benefit is another, and the 3rd and 4th are a little hard to summarize, but basically one of them is, do I have an obligation to help other people who need help? And the 4th one is, do I have an obligation to, the other one is, do you have an obligation to make yourself, to develop your talents? Or can you just sit in a room all day playing video games, basically? So again, those 4 examples he gives, in 2 different ways he explains why he thinks they're all morally wrong. I want you to talk about whether you think that those scenarios are morally right or wrong, and say why. Okay? Give your reasons for why they're acceptable or your reasons why they are immoral, and we'll just see how close people come to Kant, how far away they are from Kant. Okay, thank you everyone.